Econ 5.1 International Trade. Why do nations participate in international trade? International trade is characterized by two features. First, international trade is selective. Nations choose which resources and products they will trade. Second, it creates wealth. Nations pursue trade in order to increase their wealth in terms of goods, services, or resources. Basis for international trade. The basis for international trade are specialization and economic interdependence. As noted before, specialization occurs when producers provide a limited number of goods or services. Specialization may occur because of a nation's particular resources. For example, much of the world's coffee comes from nations in Central and South America, while countries like Switzerland, which don't have a climate appropriate for coffee production, must import all of their coffee, so therefore they specialize. Without international trade, a nation can consume only the goods and services it produces. The development of international trade therefore enables a nation to specialize in the production of goods and services that can be traded for other products. Specialization further offers the nation an opportunity to become efficient in the production of a few goods and services and to trade them for whatever goods and services the nation cannot supply to its people on its own. Therefore, it creates economic interdependence. Interdependence means that they are dependent upon each other in a positive relationship. Factors of production. Remember the factors of production, CELL, those natural resources, human resources, capital resources, and entrepreneurship. They're not equally distributed throughout the entire world. For example, Iraq doesn't have very much water, so therefore they need to use their water carefully. This uneven resource distribution encourages nations to trade in order to improve their citizens' standard of living. So in encouraging trade, they must trade to get all the goods and services they require. Well, how do they decide what to produce? We'll get to that in just a minute. But let's look at an example here. The nation of Japan uses a lot of crude oil. However, if you note from the graph, they don't produce any crude oil themselves. Therefore, they have to import an extreme amount of oil. To acquire oil, they must produce other things that they can trade with. How to determine how a nation decides what to produce is determined by two related economic concepts, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. How a nation decides what to produce is determined partially by what we call their absolute advantage. Absolute advantage is when producing a certain good when it can do so with a greater efficiency than its partner can trade. For example, let's think about Costa Rica and Panama. They both produce coffee and lumber. Costa Rica can produce each at a lower cost than it would be, so therefore it would be correct to say that Costa Rica holds an absolute advantage over Panama in both of these items. So if Costa Rica can produce them for less, they hold an absolute advantage. Same thing is true if, like for instance, a lawyer can type 120 words a minute, while the lawyer's secretary, who's not an attorney and has no training in law, can type only 100 words per minute. Then it would be correct to say that the attorney has an absolute advantage in both practicing law and in typing. So absolute advantage kind of leads you to believe that why would you ever produce anything else, or why would you trade if you have absolute advantage in both things like coffee and lumber, as Costa Rica does? Well, then we take a look at their comparative advantage. The existence of absolute advantage does not mean that the nation with the absolute advantage will produce everything, while the other nation will produce no goods and services at all. Absolute advantage means that they're comparatively best at something by determining where the greatest absolute advantage occurs for each nation. Therefore, what do they produce at a lower opportunity cost? The particular items that each nation produces will be determined by identifying its comparative advantage. So the comparative advantage again may be found by determining where the greatest absolute advantage occurs for each nation. Consider the example of the attorney and the secretary that I gave you a moment ago. While the attorney is absolutely more productive in both practicing law and in typing, the greatest advantage is in practicing law. The secretary might not know anything about practicing law, but may be quite skilled at typing. Therefore, the attorney has the comparative advantage in practicing law. On this basis, the attorney would be wise to practice law and let the secretary handle the typing. Comparative advantage, therefore, determines how individuals specialize. So let's take another example here for a minute. Let's look at the production of bananas and coffee by two nations, Costa Rica and Panama. Let's suppose that if Costa Rica devoted all of its resources to producing coffee, it could produce 25 million pounds per year. And if it devoted all of its resources to growing bananas, it could produce 5 million pounds a year. In terms of resources, Costa Rica thus would be producing 5 pounds of coffee for every 1 pound of bananas. The pound of bananas would be the trade-off for the 5 pounds of coffee, so they'd be trading 1 pound of bananas for every 5 pounds of coffee. Costa Rica's exchange ratio between coffee and bananas would be 5 to 1. Suppose that also if Panama devoted all of its resources to coffee production, it could produce 12 million pounds of coffee per year. If Panama devoted all of its resources to banana production instead, they would produce 4 million pounds per year. So this is very much like the production possibilities graph that we saw in the beginning of the quarter. In terms of resources, Panama would be producing 3 pounds of coffee for every 1 pound of bananas. We just do the simple ratio, fraction reduction, and we see that this is true. The pound of bananas would be the trade-off for 3 pounds of coffee for Panama. Panama's exchange ratio between coffee and bananas is therefore 3 to 1. Clearly, Costa Rica would be more productive in both coffee and bananas. However, the country would be comparatively or relatively more productive in producing coffee. Why? On that basis, it would benefit both nations to specialize, with Costa Rica producing coffee and Panama producing bananas. The exact trade ratio will determine just how much each country would benefit by trade. So long as the trade ratio was between 5 to 1 for Costa Rica and 3 to 1 for Panama, both nations would benefit by specializing. So we can find a happy medium here. We can suppose that the trade ratio was determined to be 4 to 1. If Costa Rica specializes in coffee and Panama specializes in bananas, we can see how this works. When Costa Rica specializes in coffee, with international trade, it would only have to give up or trade off 4 pounds of coffee for 1 pound of bananas. Without trade, it would have to give up 5 pounds of coffee for a single pound of bananas. Therefore, Costa Rica would benefit from international trade and specialization. If we think about this on Panama's side, so therefore the trade ratio, Costa Rica produces the 4 pounds of coffee and then they get 1 pound of bananas. Panama specializes in bananas at the 4 to 1 trade ratio. For every 1 pound of bananas it trades, it would receive 4 pounds of coffee. Without trade, remember, it would have to give up or trade off a pound of bananas for only 3 pounds of coffee. Thus, Panama too would benefit from trade and specialization. The original domestic pre-trade production ratios of 5 to 1 and 3 to 1 describe each nation's original production possibilities, while the new production possibilities of 4 to 1 describes the situation once the concept of comparative advantage is applied. So remember that this is selective and it creates wealth. That's why that Costa Rica and Panama would trade. They're choosing which products to trade, so therefore it is selective, and it does create wealth. It allows Costa Rica to give up less to get bananas and Panama to give up less to get coffee. Therefore, each country specializes and focuses on what they're best at. Give this one a try on your own. Let's say that there's 2 products, rice and rubber, and 2 countries which produce those products, Thailand and Malaysia. Thailand can produce 8,000 tons of rice or 2,000 tons of rubber. Malaysia can produce 10,000 tons of rice or 4,000 tons of rubber. Which country should specialize in which product to trade with the other? Figure out the comparative advantage in this scenario. We'll go through the answers in class.